Hello, Facebook. I'm going to start the music. And Sean, you could assist me in letting people in from the waiting room.
Will do.
Oh, I need to share my music.
I did that last week.
Oh,
I was jamming
oh,
out to it and started the show. Oh,
there we go. Let it go for a little bit. Hey, hello, everybody, and welcome to our VBC Happy Hour for this Monday, December 18th. This is our final VBC Happy Hour of 2023. We will not be here next Monday, which is Christmas Day, nor the week after that, which will be New Year's Day. So this is it. This is it for 2023. And what a program it is to have author Donald L. Miller, author of Masters of the Air, which is being made into a what I understand to be the most expensive and the most elaborate, I think, TV production in history. It will debut on Apple TV, Apple Plus TV next month, a 9-part series. We have the author of the whole story right here, and man, are we excited to have a conversation with him about that tonight. I just want to thank everybody who's been joining us for the past year at this VBC Happy Hour. For those of you, some of you might be new to the Veterans Breakfast Club because you're here to listen to our esteemed guest. My name is Todd DiPastino. I'm the founder and director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit that's been around for 15 years, holding conversations about the military experience, past and present. We welcome conversations about all eras, all ages, all branches of service, all MOSs, all jobs within the military. I'm not a veteran. Sean's not a veteran. Glenn's not a veteran. The three people who are hosting and co-hosting tonight, none of us is a veteran. We're here to ask questions and to listen and to share the stories that we hear, being educated and be inspired by them. And we're very grateful to have veterans join us and members of military families to join us and share their stories. We do this in person. We do it online. We have a podcast. We publish a quarterly magazine, and we do all this under the auspices of a nonprofit founded here in Pennsylvania. We do ask that people donate if they can. Please do subscribe to our emails, subscribe to our magazine, which is free of charge. You go to our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org/donate to donate to the Veterans Breakfast Club. We'd love to have your support and would love to have you join us anytime. I would also want to thank our sponsor for VBC Happy Hour. They've been sponsoring all year, tobacco-free Adagio Health. They have helped to underwrite this program. Adagio Health provides health, wellness, and nutrition services and support throughout Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And their tobacco-free program, I just met with a bunch of tobacco-free folks on Friday. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience talking with them. And they're dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about tobacco hazards and secondhand smoke, and advocating for policies for healthier places to live, work, and play. And you can find out more about what they do at tobaccofree.adagio.health.org. That's tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And I want to introduce my great colleague here and friend, Sean Hall, our director of programming. You've worked very hard this year to bring us wonderful podcasts, well over 40 podcasts that you've recorded for the year, and you've recorded your final podcast of 2023, I believe, right?
that's right. Yeah, I echo your sentiments. Thank you, everyone, for supporting us and joining us throughout the year. Thank you for supporting and listening to the Scuttlebutt podcast. We had one more that was released today. I interviewed Emily Bleeker. She is not a veteran. She is an author, and she's written 7 novels, and her most recent one is a historical fiction novel. But what brought her to me, because you might wonder, why is she on a military podcast? Part of it's a dual timeline story, and the part in the past takes place at the POW camp that was in Indiana that had Italian POWs. And very good story. I loved the book, and I loved the conversation that I had with her. We opened up a lot of her a lot of her history. She had cancer at a young age, which sort of really laser focused her on what she wanted, which was to write books. And that she has done. A great conversation. I'll put the link into the chat. Give it a listen. And if you'd like, grab one of her books. She has 7 out that I'm sure she would appreciate the support there as well.
All right, now I will just introduce Glenn Flickinger. He's the host of our Greatest Generation Live. Thank you so much, Glenn, for hosting all year with us, these wonderful programs. And thank you also for snagging this great guest to end the year on. That's
Oh, I did offer him a whiskey tonight. I'm not sure we can supply it all the way out to Eastern Pennsylvania, but it's a wish anyway. Look, it's a great pleasure to have you on tonight, Dr. Miller.
It's Don.
Don Miller, thank you.
That was the protocol.
My wife has actually complained because I bring this book to bed with me all the time, and she
Oh my goodness.
You're going to drop that one day on me and break my nose. So my well-worn copy of your incredibly excellent book, Masters of the Air. For those of you who don't know me, I've been very fortunate for the past few years to be on the board of the Veterans Breakfast Club and to host this Greatest Generation Live program once or twice a month, depending on our schedule. We've done many a program on the 8th Air Force or on the Army Air Forces in general. Todd before me interviewed many 8th Air Force veterans. I saw you were on the Lucky Luckadoo the other day.
Oh, he's my man. I love Lucky.
We had him on a year ago. I don't know if he might tune in tonight. Do you see him anywhere on the? He's a fascinating man for his age. He's as sharp as a tack.
You don't even have to use for his age.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So this, I feel, is sort of like a culmination of all those programs we've done before to bring it to this, and the excitement about the upcoming miniseries. You can just feel it building and building. So we're really, really pleased to have you on, Don. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really admire what you guys do.
Well, I get to ask the first question, I guess. And
okay.
We, just for our audience sake, they're used to me, Don, often having a PowerPoint that we go through with pictures and so forth, depending on the author or the veteran. We're not going to do that tonight. I have some photos that we can throw up if we get to that point. We're just going to make this as interactive and casual a discussion as we can.
Okay.
So all of our members and guests, please be ready to ask questions. But I'll start off if I can. Professor of history at Lafayette College since the 1970s, I think so. I think I recall reading.
78 I came, yeah.
78, okay. Written many a history book on many different topics. But was this your first book on World War II or one of your first books on World War II?
It was my third. I started out with a book called The Story of World War II. That's a history of the war, and published right after 9/11, actually. And then did one exclusively on the Pacific, called D-Days in the Pacific, the amphibious invasions. There are a lot of them, a lot of D-Days. And then this was the last one, yeah. And then I moved on and did other books. I'm currently working on the second volume of a 2-part study of Ulysses Grant. I started with the Vicksburg campaign, take you through the Vicksburg campaign, and that's the climactic, event in the book. And then the one I'm working on now is about the partnership between Lincoln and Grant, kind of the partnership that won the war. And so I'll take the story from Vicksburg all the way down to Appomattox.
Quite a spread of history, Don. Quite a impressive spread.
Yeah, it's keeps me up at night. Mostly worrying. Am I going to get it right?
What motivated you to write about the 8th Air Force and the 100th Bomber Squadron? What was the reasoning behind?
As I said, I came to the study of World War II, rather late. I had done 5 books, mostly on cities. The most recent one before this one was a big sprawling history of a city I love, but have no ancestral relationships with, and that's Chicago. And the year it was published, my father died in 1995, and he was a World War II veteran, an Air Force veteran, and I really felt guilty that I had not engaged his war in my writing. I had planned to do it up the road. Don't know exactly what kind of book I was going to do, but it was going to have something to do with the Air Force and probably the 8th Air Force. And I felt very guilty about that. And the deep dive began when I just started picking up studies of the 8th Air Force and realizing that no one had written the kind of book that I wanted to write. And that's a good start. The field is clear. And I wanted to write what I call a holistic study of the 8th Air Force that would take you from the mechanics to the gunners, to the navigators, to the nurses, to the Red Cross girls on base, to the people in the community, to the people in London during the Blitz, etc., to the Germans under the bombs and on the battlefield. Escape and invasion and all those sorts of the life inside the stalags. That's the kind of book I wanted to take on. And because so many of the books I encountered were just bang, bang, bang combat stuff, and there's a lot more to the story than that. So I was struck by a book that I read by a guy named Grinker, and it's called Men Under Stress. And it's at the time he wrote the book, 1944-45. He was a psychiatrist working for the Air Force in England for an institution called Central Medical Establishment. And that was set up in England in 1942-43 to care for men who were suffering tremendous stress and, under combat, post-traumatic stress disorder, whatever you want to call it, combat fatigue. The British cruelly called it, lack of moral fiber. That's a tough one. And Grinker in this book, there's not much of a narrative to it, but its pull for me was he sets it up as a series of case studies. He actually flew with the guys to get a sense of what they experienced. He said, I'm not going to be able to pull any miracle cures off, but I'm going to get these guys back in the planes. I got to know what got them into the hospital in the first place. And so it was incredible, the number of horrific, catastrophic experiences these guys endured. And then I saw the numbers, for the 8th Air Force. A small outfit, relatively, about 240,000 total in the war, but 26,000 killed in action. And that doesn't include crashes in England, crashes in the home front, things like that. You add a third to that number with those. And when you put that number up there, 26,000, you got to compare it with, say, the Marine Corps, which was they're a central feature of my book on the Pacific. And they took 18,600 from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the entire Pacific War. That was the number. And against 26,000 for the 8th Air Force. And I never heard numbers like that before. In addition, about 28,000 8th Air Force crewmen were imprisoned, in stalags during the war. And and over 70% of the men who flew for the 8th Air Force were casualties. So I thought I was always interested in, and it started with my book, The Story of World War II. To get in that book, you had to have been at the point of the spear. You had to have experienced combat. Now, that doesn't mean you had to have a uniform and a gun. That would include Germans under the bombs, Brits under the bombs, etc. Combat nurses, and, female correspondents who covered the war in Europe, Martha Gellhorn, Lee Miller, and people like that. And in the process of doing that, I really was interested in studying how they held up under the extreme stress of combat. which is, wartime combat is probably the greatest stress that a human being can endure, if you can endure it. And so I was thinking, of doing the book exclusively on this subject, but I saw there were so many other dimensions that had to be worked into this. So the book grew out of that, and then serendipitously, I thought, well, I'm going to get a start by interviewing veterans. I didn't have to go far to interview veterans. I mean, I come from a military family. My uncle flew in B-29s in the Pacific, and there's Jimmy Stewart from Pennsylvania. And
so, if I could explain this and ask you to comment on it. So we did a program on Jimmy Stewart. Was it early this year, Todd? I've forgotten the timing. There's a man named Robert Mattson who wrote a biography of Jimmy Stewart, and it was just really well done.
Yeah,
so
nice.
This picture always caught me as, wow, look at this man from when he started his tour as a young man, and you'd think he aged 15 or 20 years, and he actually only aged 3 years, I think.
Yeah. He was a little older when he went in. He was in his mid-30s, and he was a pilot also. He had a commercial pilot's license, and of course stayed with the Air Force into the 50s with the Strategic Air Command. He was the real deal, widely recognized by veterans as one of the great combat commanders in the war. Absolutely.
But, what we learned in reading Robert Mattson's book and having him on is how he suffered from the stress. And
he did.
You can see that in this comparison of these two photos.
Well, I talked to a couple of the men at his base when they had a particularly calamitous experience, and he met individually. He met them as a group, and then individually he stayed with them and continued to see them and talk them down out of that experience, and try to set them at ease and make them feel a little bit more comfortable. And maybe even, he wasn't trying to get them up there to fly again. Most of them did, but he was terrific at crew morale, as was the fellow I was going to mention, Robert Rosie Rosenthal, who's the central character in my book. And Rosie was great with the crews, a measured guy. The Air Force tested flyers and in training, and looked for personality traits that were suited to the kind of aircraft and the kind of combat they were going to endure. Fighter pilots, they're looking for gamblers, recklessness, guts, little craziness, things like that. Bomber pilots, they're looking for steadiness. They got to handle a plane. They got to handle a crew as well, a jittery crew of guys that averaged about 22 years old in 1942, 43. And that's an awful job under combat. The stress and the fury of combat, which we try to capture in the film we made on the book called Masters of the Air. We try to capture that experience inside the plane. So the film becomes less of a Tom Cruise type of dogfight type of film, and more of an experiential thing where you're immersed in the fuselage, a place more constricted than a submarine fuselage. That compounded the stresses of combat enormously.
Rosie Rosenthal, I'm guessing he's featured in the miniseries, or one of the featured.
He is one of the featured characters, yeah. He doesn't go over with the original. The 100th trained in the States first, and they were a wild, crazy bunch of guys. They almost didn't get commissioned. They were told they weren't going to make it to England. They, broken protocol a number of times, crazy stuff like dropping wrenches with notes on them out over cities that they had lived in. And they were supposed to all meet in one place in the United States on a particular mission. And most of them flew to their own hometowns or their girlfriends' hometowns and scattered all over the place. Commander was fired. They had another commander take them over to England, and they didn't know if they'd be able to stay. So it's an undisciplined outfit. That's one of the reasons that the 100th became the Bloody 100th. It took so many casualties initially because to survive in the air war, you had to be, as Curtis LeMay kept emphasizing, he was the greatest of the American air commanders, often satirized today, but worshipped by the flyers. And during the war, he said, if you're going to live, you're going to have to fly disciplined in tight groups called combat boxes. And this kind of freaked the guys out. You can't take evasive action when you go into a flak field, a murderous flak field. Maybe there's 35 German flak guns firing shrapnel and shells into the sky and exploding all around your plane. And let's say you're in the nose of the plane, which is plexiglass. It's not bulletproof. And you're approaching the target. You're in control of the plane. The pilot's transferred, his duties to you, so you control the plane, and you decide when and where you're going to bomb. And you're looking down, but the flak, before that the fighters, but now the flak is right in front of you, exploding all around you. And you could have taken evasive action, and the guys did it first. And LeMay kept telling them, if you take evasive action, you're going to miss the target a lot. And then take a place like Saint-Nazaire on the Brittany coast in France, known as Flak City. The 8th Air Force took a lot of casualties trying to knock out sub-pens, submarine storage pens, and on the coast of Brittany. And the missions weren't working. The bombs were bouncing off the reinforced concrete fortifications and dugouts like ping pong balls. So LeMay's point was, you're going to have to go back again and again, but if we do it right, maybe we cut down the number of flights to Saint-Nazaire. And what he's emphasizing is that you have to fly level, like a yardstick, and you can't move. If you're going to fly into the flak, you fly into the flak, but you got to have a level platform to bomb correctly. And that remained Air Force doctrine throughout the rest of the war. And they had to train special guys to do that. A lot of navigators, a lot of bombardiers just weren't up to it. So he trained special lead bombardiers and lead navigators, and they would lead an entire squadron. And when the lead navigator took the squadron to the city and to the spot in the city that they're going to bomb, and the bombardier dropped, the ordnance. And when he did, he dropped a smoke bomb, and all other bombers in the formation dropped on that signal. So they were just what were called toggleiers. They just hit a toggle switch. So they didn't even have to have, and most of them didn't have, northern bomb sights. The only northern bomb sights were in the lead, were with the lead crews. And so bombing became more accurate. It was never completely accurate. This idea of pinpoint bombing is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. And the Air Force found that out rather quickly. They trained these. Go ahead.
Didn't the weather have such a huge factor with the overcast and the ability to even see through the bomb site to where they were bombing?
Well, I'm amazed. There's a group called the Bomber Mafia, down in Alabama, and who were at staff college down there to train officers for the approaching World War II for what was planned to be the world's first and a gigantic bomber war. And their doctrine stated that with the enclosed cockpit, you get rid of, a lot of problems. With 2 wings rather than 4, you get rid of a lot of problems. With gigantic 4 engines, you get rid of a lot of other problems. You can now, it was argued, fly above the flak, fly higher than the fighters. And it was argued, erroneously, that you could fly faster than the fighter planes that the Germans possessed. And the Me-262 was the Messerschmitt that Germans, the most effective German fighter at the end of the 1930s, early 40s. And you don't have to worry about flak, you don't have to worry about fighters, and you don't have to worry about weather. That isn't even brought into the equation. They did talk about weather in the sense that they were going to experience overcast, but they thought they could develop instruments that could allow them to get through the overcast pretty easily. That didn't happen early enough. And instruments like the Norden bomb sight that could put you right on the target and bomb accurately so that you're hitting production facilities rather than civilians. And they didn't do this for moral reasons. Morality plays no issue at all. No, nothing. It's always effectiveness. Later in the war, when Arthur Harris, Bomber Harris, as he's known in England, who was head of Bomber Command and led, of course, the gigantic raids that the RAF flew at night, he saw things entirely differently. He always said that I'm not out to bomb German factories. I'm not out to kill a factory. I'm out to kill Germans and production workers. And to do that, we're just going to saturate the city and destroy as much housing as industrial facilities. So they're flying those types of missions. And when there were arguments among the air staffs, and I have the minutes of these meetings, they're absolutely fascinating. Like toward the end of the war, should we have bombed Dresden or not? They debated this. And most were against it on the idea, not of morality, but the simple idea that it was ineffective. Most of the German industry was located outside the city of Dresden and survived bombing. And two subsequent missions to Dresden after the gigantic raid destroyed the transportation facilities that the 8th had aimed at in the first raid, and took very few crew losses and killed under 1,000 Germans. So these air chiefs like Jimmy Doolittle, who's head of the 8th Air Force at the time, are arguing with Harris that you're bombing cities like Würzburg. It's an industrial city. No, it's a university city. You've annihilated the city. You know, there is no Würzburg any longer. You flattened it. What good is that when we're honing in on the Achilles heel of the German economy, its oil facilities and its transportation networks? We want to bomb marshalling yards. We want to bomb oil refineries. This is what's going to knock Germany out of the war. The 8th Air Force was created to hit industrial targets. The crews were trained to do that as well. And so that was the argument with Harris that was, that continued throughout the war.
Just to identify these men, hopefully you're seeing the picture I've put up here. That's Bomber Harris on the right, Spots in the center, and Acre on the left. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, I grew up after the war a block from Spots Airfield in Reading, Pennsylvania. Spots was from Boyertown, just outside of Reading. And secretary lived in the Reading area, and fascinating woman. Was with her. She was with him throughout the war. But he is head of all air forces in ETO, in the European Theater of War. So he heads the 15th Air Force, which is located in southern Italy, headquartered in southern Italy, North Africa. He's head of the 8th Air Force, the 9th Air Force, which is a tactical bombing unit that bombs infantry units and things like that. The 8th Air Force is a strategic bomb force, bombing key targets. The idea being that there are nodules, key industries, not all industries, just key industries like ball bearings, that if you knock that industry out, whether it's oil or ball bearings, you put a horrible hurt on the German economy. And so there are targeting groups back in the United States. Many of these guys, young men at the time, like Walt Rostow and et cetera, later were advisors under LBJ and Kennedy, and advised on the Vietnam bombing. But they are the target analysts, and their recommendations, and that's all they were. You got to remember this about the Air Force in World War II and in general, and I hardly ever hear this mentioned in any histories of the war. They are almost an autonomous organization. There's almost no civilian control. They're running the kind of war they want to run. And they don't worry about public opinion. They make their own decisions based on what they think is effective. Um, there are good and bad things about that, which I get into in the book, but it is a different species than the modern Air Force, yeah, which is highly politicized, as are all the services.
Todd, let me just pause here for a minute. Are there questions that our audience would like to pose or that have been put in the chat room that we should address?
Let's see. Are you a veteran, Don? That was one question.
No, I signed up for the Marine Corps, but I had a disability.
Let's see. We have Tony Lupo asked, why did it take until 1944 to recognize that oil needed to be targeted more fully?
$1 million question. You scratch your head when you do a history of the 8th Air Force. There's that target sitting out there, these gigantic oil refineries in places like one was called Leuna, and they're in central Germany, just outside the Ruhr, and they were vulnerable. They did have powerful defenses, flak batteries, fighter fields around them, but they can be hit because it can be spotted, and we don't go after them until late in the war. There's this fascination with panacea targets, like well, the sub thing isn't submarine facilities. That's not a panacea target. They're trying to destroy. The Germans are trying to destroy the lifeline between the United States and Britain, the thing that keeps the war alive. Everything England got, that was war worthy, almost everything is coming from the United States, including 99% of their fuel. So they got to cut that line and defeat the U-boat. So that's not a panacea target. But ball bearings should have been rolled into, I think, other targets, like the electrical grid, for example, which as several Air Force commanders after the war, writing tomes about their experiences, felt that, we should have bombed, the Air Force should have bombed not only the transportation grid, but the electric grid, which again wasn't very well protected. Spots was against it. He thought it was too hard a target to hit. But Spots is in the forefront for running raids against oil. In the run-up to D-Day, the entire 8th Air Force and the 9th Air Force in England, the Tactical Air Force, and the British, the RAF, Bomber Command, they come under the control of Dwight Eisenhower. Because, as Eisenhower famously said, if the Luftwaffe shows up on invasion day, the fleet doesn't sail, and because it'll be decimated, and decimated in the sea, at sea, or perhaps even in the ports. So we have to clear the skies. We have to attain absolute air, not only superiority, but supremacy. So that is announced about the time they decide that they're going to go in, and in either 43 or 44, and then it's narrowed down to May of 44. It's later changed, of course, to June. And that's in June of 43. So they have 1 year between June 43 and May 44 to defeat the most powerful Air Force in the world. And they are getting hammered by the Germans at this point. They're losing the air war. And it got worse. By September of that year, it seems that they have lost control of the skies over Germany and that the Germans are winning the air war. So much so that there's pressure coming from Churchill on Ira Aker, who was the commander of the 8th Air Force, and Carl Spaatz, the commander of all American Air Forces in Europe, to fold up the 8th and wrap it into Bomber Command and have the 8th fly at night, where Churchill thought that they would take fewer casualties. I don't know about that. Bomber Command had 110,000 guys that flew, 110,000. 55,000 were killed. Enormous loss rate, But anyway, that was the idea. So Aker was sweating it. He even authorized a couple of nighttime missions around Munich. He had to refit the entire plane. You can't shoot out the flames from the engines and things like that. You had to have all kinds of equipment changes, and eventually it's scrapped when we finally get an escort fighter, the P-51 Mustang, that can do what, and this is amazing, what everyone thought was impossible. I say that's amazing because we're the world's leaders in technology, in undisputed technological giants. Okay, but scientists, especially engineers, are arguing that it's impossible to build a plane that is fast and nimble, that can handle itself really well in combat exercises like dogfights and things like that. In other words, it can survive in the air. And at the same time, has legs, can get all the way to targets like oil facilities and chemical facilities in Austria and Hungary. Because if you weigh the bomber down with fuel, it won't make it to the target. It's too vulnerable. And if you go light on the fuel, you can't get to the target, and you don't have the range. But the impossible became possible, and these superplanes, as they were called at the time, started arriving in England in very late 1943. And there's a fight over who's going to have them. The 9th Air Force, tactical, or the Strategic Air Force is the 8th. And the Strategic won, and they became escorts increasingly, the main escorts. Before this, there are a number of other fighter planes that are escorting bombers up to about Hanover in Germany, just across the German border. Then they had to peel off, and there's a Thunderbolt, and one of the more effective of the fighter escorts, and also tremendous on ground support.
But limited in range compared to the P-51, right?
Limited in range, absolutely. Good for dive bombing. Patton used them all the time. They had air-cooled engines. So you take a shot, you're not going to lose all your water, and the engine blows out on you. That's the Lightning. People ask me all the time why the Lightning wasn't used more efficiently and effectively in Europe. We had a lot of Lightnings in the air earlier in the war. It's a very fast plane, and it really dives well. And it gave the Messerschmitts a lot of problems. But Doolittle didn't like the plane. Ager didn't like the plane because they didn't perform well. The argument was they didn't perform well at great altitudes. Most bombing missions are flown between 18,000 and 23,000 feet in the air, a couple miles up, in other words. And the Lightning, tended problems with stalling out and things like that. And some of the same propeller problems that the B-29 had in the Pacific. So they shipped a lot of them to the Pacific, where it became the Lightning the most effective fighter plane in the Pacific War. Most of the Pacific aces flew Lightnings. Terrific plane. The 8th Air Force used them for scouting missions. They would strip them of all their guns and lighten the fuel load and fly over targets to scout the target, to map the target with extremely accurate color film, and that would be available to the operations officers who planned the mission for the next day. I got some of my best photographs of life on the bases out of these cameras. I went down to the 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah. I became almost a resident there, and working with the staff, I pulled out a number of these cameras, and the film was still in there. So we started to run the film. Turns out these are frisky guys, young guys, 19, 20, 23 years old, and they're taking the camera with them when they're not on missions. And they're photographing everything. They take it to London. Okay, they're photographing women.
Yeah, I was just going to
say strip clubs. They're photographing dances on the base. They're photographing bicycle races inside the officers' clubs and things like that. All the hijinks on the base, and it's in color with extreme clarity. These cameras are tremendous. So got a lot of great stuff, and I'm giving away a book idea here too. I think that'd be a wonderful pictorial book, just of these things. I was at an air base out in California one day, and I was walking through there, and I heard a narrator, and I said, "Oh, they got a film on. Go take a look at what they're showing." And it was a film that was done on the 100th bomb, on the 100th bomb group by somebody at the 100th, and it was done with these cameras, and it was fantastic. That's when I started to ask a lot of questions about it. In any event, yeah. Sometimes you go to strange places for your sources. Yeah.
That was a photo of a P-51 pilot that we interviewed way back when. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. That's Bud Anderson. Did you ever run across Bud Anderson?
Oh, absolutely.
He was my first interview on the Veterans Breakfast Club.
He's an incredible guy.
98 years old, and he talked for 2 hours straight. You remember that, Todd? He tired us out. He tired us out. Like, I gotta go to bed.
And he's now 101 years old. He is not deceased.
Oh, I thought he was deceased.
No. Mm-mm.
Oh,
no, he's still alive.
my apologies, Bud. My
Yeah,
apologies.
he is still alive. Yeah, who was a lot like that was Chuck Yeager. What a great interview he was, and and what an experience. He was a Mustang pilot.
Yes. We count him as a Pittsburgher, even though he's from West Virginia. It's close enough.
That doesn't count. Yeah, that doesn't count. Yeah.
Other questions, Todd, from the audience?
Yeah, I want to invite people to raise their Zoom hand here if they have a question they want to ask Don Miller, or they can just wave their hand in front of the camera. We have a lot of comments and some questions also here in the chat. We have, I love Pat Hughes, Vietnam veteran from the great state of Texas, just loves your book, Don. He just said, what a great commitment you made to covering all parts of the story, not just the bang bang combat box story, but the German side, escape and evasion, the ground crews, everything. Tony Lupo asks again, how do you determine which firsthand accounts among the many that you're aware of would be included in your book?
Well, first of all, you have to decide if it has fidelity, if it holds up, if it's truthful. So you got to fact check these things. Now, the overwhelming majority of these guys aren't going to tell lies, but they might forget. That goes for somebody who experienced something 3 weeks ago and tries to tell it. It's going to be different in the retelling a year from then. So once you check that, then you have this plethora of information. And I think part of the art, and it is an art, writing a good book. I see myself a lot like a novelist. I'm looking for pace, drama, movement, etc. All the things you'll find in a really good novel. And you don't quite know where these things are going to fit. So having a good filing system is an incredible thing. I went to a seminar in New York one time recently where Bob Caro, the author of a book on Robert Moses, legendary, and now is doing Lyndon Johnson. He gave a seminar on filing. And within 2 hours after it went up on the web to sign up, it was filled. There were 50 people there. And I think they had over 300 because it's crucial. So you file these things and you cross-file them and keep them in order so that when you get to that aha spot, you might not remember it, but you can flip through your index there. Hey, there's something on air collisions, for example. Okay. Or a guy being shot at by a German fighter plane. Did that happen? How often did that happen? Do we have any evidence of that happen? So it's situational, you can game plan a book, but like a good football coach, I think you have to be good situationally, unlike Penn State's coach.
Or the Steeler coach, for that matter, but that's not good.
Trey Berman, we have a young man in Annapolis, Maryland, who joins us often. High school student. Trey, thank you for joining us. Oh, Trey. We'll go back to Trey. You have your hand up.
Can you guys hear me now?
Hey, yeah. How you doing, Trey?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, I had a question, and this is as every time Todd and Glenn, this might be a bit of a trend for you. Every time we have someone talking about bombers on, I always ask this question because it's the age-old question. You know, you talk to one plane's pilot, and they'll say his plane's the better one. You'll talk to the other, he'll say the other one, and I think Todd kind of knows what question's coming up. Which is, at least for your research, which is the better plane, the B-17 or the B-24? Um,
Well, it depends on where the plane's deployed. That's the secret to it. I mean, the B-24, the Liberator, had problems at this. It had a thing called a Davis wing, a higher wing, and they had problems at extreme altitudes, like 26,000 feet. The same kind of problems that the Lightning had. And how true that was, because I've had guide Liberator pilots crawl all over me on this one. You know, I don't feature them enough and all that. But Doolittle felt that they didn't perform well and accurately, and at those altitudes. But they carried more bombs. They made a hell of a lot more of those Liberators than they did of the Fortresses. The Fortress's huge advantage was that it could really take a licking and keep clicking. Its fuselage is, if you're an engineer, it's kind of designed like a steel frame skyscraper, where you don't have wall-bearing walls to hold up the building. The frame holds the building up. So you can knock all the aluminum sheathing on the plane, like the kind of sheathing on a building, off, and the building will still stand if the skeleton or frame holds up. So there's so many instances. I talked to a black fighter pilot who flew, with the Red Tails in the raids on Romanian oil fields. And he said when these pilots would bring their planes out of what he called the donut, this big black cloud that hung over Palesti, where the Germans had their oil facilities in Romania. When they came out of there, a lot of them had been shredded, absolutely shredded by flak. And you could see right inside the plane. It was like watching something on a stage, a play being acted out at 22,000 feet. And in fact, we know of one instances where the guy named Snuffy Smith, who received the Medal of Honor, was the recipient of the Medal of Honor. He's an air gunner. And for verification of what he had done, and what he had done was pretty incredible. When the plane was hit, I could just go through 1,000 of these tails, but 2 engines out, everything, all the electricity's gone. There's a massive fire in the rear of the plane. He urinated on it and tried to put it out. He had fire extinguishers and everything else, and eventually he did take care of 2 wounded guys, save their lives, and also allowed the pilot to land the plane after he put out the fire. We know that because there was a B-17 flying right next to him, and they saw the whole thing. And their testimonies were taken down in the briefings right after the mission. So, it was like almost filming Snuffy Smith in the air. But that gave the B-17 a huge advantage. It also had the armament was a little better. Not the armor, but the armament was a little better.
Scott Masters.
Oh, that's okay.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
I'm good, Todd. Welcome back to North America.
Thank you. I just heard from Emily Drake, and she was very pleased by the package you sent her. She's one of our World War II veterans, 98-year-old Army WAC. Scott, you interviewed her when you were down here in Pittsburgh in August, and she just gave me a call and said that you're the greatest. So thanks for doing that.
It was my pleasure. We enjoyed that quite a bit, and the students had a great time doing the video editing for her. So I had a question for Don. First of all, Don, it's a real honor to meet you. I'm looking forward to ordering the book. I'm going to ask my wife to get it for me for Christmas, and I look forward to watching the series when it's on. I had a question about
So,
the.
we're going to if you buy it in January, you get the recovered version.
Okay, I'll tell her to hold off a little bit.
Yeah.
But,
In fact, if you go on Amazon now, they have the recovered edition, and it's really pretty, and
okay.
it kind of matches the art that we use for the film.
Okay. I will tell her to wait then. And you might have guessed from Todd, I do a lot of interviews with veterans myself. And I was wondering if there's maybe a story that you could share there. I'm sure you talked to hundreds of Air Force veterans, and I'm sure many of them shared, similar stories about the fighters, the flak, the fear. But there's always little stories that kind of stand out and things that maybe come from a perspective you don't expect. I'm wondering if there's little stories like that you might be able to share with us.
Well, there are dozens of them, and that's what surprises you. It almost strains credulity. If you're writing fiction, people would accuse you of going a little overboard. The one that really sticks in my mind among many that stick in my mind is you can't have warfare without love. The kind of love that men have for one another and the way they support each other, the camaraderie. And war is impossible without it. You couldn't stand up to the strain of war without that. And there was a crew, a B-17 crew, flying in a base in northern England, in East Anglia, where the gunners made a pact. 4 gunners made a pact with one another, and shook on it, no contract or anything. That if one of them got in trouble, the others would stay with him, and until they got him out of trouble, and or experience the trouble with him, but they wouldn't leave him alone. And the plane was absolutely slaughtered in the sky, and the pilot hit the bailout bell, and everyone races, to get out of the thing. Is going to blow up any second, and the ball turret gunner who's underneath the plane, as you know, they couldn't get. This happened a lot. They couldn't get him out of there. Hydraulics were all shot, and but they could talk to him, and he's freezing down there. There's no heat and anything like that, and a lot of guys suffered, just immobilizing frostbite, that experience. But anyway, he knows he's not going to make it, and he knows the plane's, not going to stay in the air very long. And the guys decide to stay with him. And now we have witnesses. The pilot, he saw that. He urged them to go, and they didn't go, and they crashed not too far from the base. They tried to save the plane. This happened a lot. When the 2 most vulnerable positions in the plane, you would think it would be the ball turret and the tail gunner, were the pilot and the co-pilot. After all, the Germans attacked en echelon, straight across, wingtip to wingtip from the front, and at closing speeds of 600 miles an hour. And their targets were the pilot and the co-pilot. And everything else was up front, too. The bombardier, the navigator. The gas tanks were in the wings, the engines, etc. It's all up front. In the beginning of the war, they were afraid of what they called the Boeings. They always called the B-17s the Boeings. And Adolf Galland, the German fighter commander, talked a lot about how his boys were afraid of the Boeings when they flew in the combat boxes, because they took a hammering, and they delivered a hammering, but they also took a hammering. And so, that often happened in the stress of combat. So, if you were in the front of that plane, the chances of being beheaded were pretty high, beheaded by a shell. And so a lot of times the pilot and co-pilot would be killed or mortally wounded on the mission, and one of the gunners might have had some flight training and washed out, say. So they had flown actually a B-17 in training, and they tried to land the thing. I have cases where they made it, sometimes 300 and 400 miles to base, after being, whacked pretty hard in Germany, made it across, the cliffs of Dover and home free, and many that didn't make it at all. But they would try to get into radio communication with the control tower as fast as possible. Get a really good pilot up in the control tower. That's what my dad did, and try to guide the plane in. And sometimes that didn't work. If I were Andy Rooney and you had asked me a question, Andy covered the war, and he'd tell you the story of the ball turret gunner who was trapped in the turret, and the plane was crippled. And again, everything broke down. There was a lever you could turn to open, the turret, and they couldn't even move that. So and the horrible thing about this is that they weren't able to get the wheels down. So they're going to have to do a belly landing. And so they had to tell the kid, he was only 19, had to tell the kid he was going to die, that he was going to be squashed when they landed. So they got a priest up in the control tower. They gave him the last rites, and they landed the plane. I have a picture of the turret, and Randall Jarrell, who's the poet of the 8th Air Force and a great poet, has a poem on this, and he makes the point that they washed his remains, the turret gunner's remains, out of the turret with a hose. He talks about times where they brought the remains back to his barracks in a coffee can before they got a proper burial. There's so many stories like that, and valor and stuff, that it's just sometimes a little bit overwhelming. You can,
Yeah.
Brad Washabaugh,
Yes.
Marine Corps Colonel. How are you, Brad?
Good. I raced to the library to get a copy of the book because I knew the series was coming out, and I was able to get the last copy at our library here, and I'm reading it right now, and it is gripping. I mean, I'm an infantryman, Don, and when I read the book, I feel like I'm right there in the pilot's seat or in the crew member seat or anywhere that you describe in the book. It takes you right there to the experience, and you've done a masterful job in writing it. And I'm enjoying your book very much. I just can't put it down. Congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, that's you caught what I tried to do, what I set out to do when I wrote the book, to try to put you, like I try in the Pacific book, to put you in the foxhole, to put you in the cockpit and describe that experience. A lot of people turn their head and say, well, I can't stand to look at gore or anything like that. But what about those kids? Don't we dishonor them if we don't tell the tale fully, and what they went through, what they had to experience? I think we do. There's a lot of incidences of that. My uncle was with the Big Red One, 1st Division, and he was in the first wave at D-Day and fought right through the war, through the Hurtgen Forest, and wounded twice and captured by the Germans, the whole thing. So we knew his story really, really well. But it's kind of interesting. He would talk to my dad and other flyers and say, how did you guys do that? How did you, where my dad was amazed that my uncle went through the kinds of experiences that he did. 18 of the 20 guys that he landed with in his Higgins boat on Omaha Beach were dead by the time they got to Bastogne. So it was a lot of mutual respect, for everyone that flew or fought.
I wanted to ask you, how did your book make it to the makings of a miniseries? I mean, it's a gift that we're all going to enjoy, but how did that come about?
Wow, it's a long story. I'll try to make it short. I had done some work for Hanks and Spielberg. Our association, really, my association with Stephen Ambrose particularly, we, by the way, had the same editor at Simon & Schuster, so we knew each other before Stephen even wrote, before I started doing World War II books. I knew Stephen Ambrose as a diplomatic historian and a biographer of Richard Nixon. And but Steve told me one day that he's going to found this museum. And of course, it became the World War II Museum in New Orleans, $36 million later. And he's going to do it for $1 million. But actually, it's 360. But anyway, I went down for the opening, and I met Spielberg and Hanks, and had dinner with them, and not privately, but Steve introduced me and said, "Hey, you might want to use this guy sometime." And when it came time to do a number of films, Hanks would give me a call. We did a film together that introduces the museum. When you went to the museum, it's called Beyond All Boundaries. He and I, and a couple others worked on that film. And we did a film that I really liked a lot called He Has Seen War. And there we took the guys that we dealt with in the Pacific and Band of Brothers, and we took them from summer 45, the end of the war, down to their deaths, their whole post-war experience. That was a great book to write because we wrapped the stories of the families into that and went around and interviewed all the family, things like that. People like Eugene Sledge and whatnot. So, and I worked closely with Hanks on that film. And then one day I got a call from him, and I was with I had a lot of grandkids. I was with the 3 girls, and at the Bethlehem, Pennsylvania Public Library. And we were going to, every week we'd go and take out a number of books, all of which would get lost. And it never returned to the library. Library bill was incredible. But I got a call from Spielberg's office, and they said, "Well, you want to talk?" And yeah. And they got on the phone and said, as a group, and said, "We want to do your book." I said, "What does that mean?" "Well, we want to make a feature series like Band of Brothers on the book." Well, that was a shock. Yeah. And I said to the smallest one, Ashley, I said, she was making a lot of noise. She, "Well, we got to go get ice cream." And I said, "I'm talking to somebody really important." She said, "I'm important too." I said, "I know you're important."
I love it.
Well,
Anyway.
if I could follow that up with another question, and Brad, thank you so much for turning it to the miniseries. I was thinking the same thing. Here we are after 8 o'clock. We hadn't even touched on that yet. So there's a screenwriter. I think the name is John Orloff for the
really good screenwriter. Yeah,
involved with Band of Brothers in the Pacific and so forth. What is that experience like for an author who writes a book that is, I think it's 7.5 pounds at least, to be able to turn that into a dramatic series this way? What's that experience like of going through that process?
Well, as I told John, who I didn't know before, good luck. It's a hard thing to do because I had, for example, a book I wrote on Chicago City of the Century was made into a week-long PBS series, kind of like Ken Burns had done, and Rick Burns too on New York. But you sit there in a room and it's kind of strange. They're if you're brought into the process, and I was lucky on this project and on the Chicago project in that I was an integral part of the process. Some authors like Dave McCullough, for example, with his John Adams, they just peeled off and went and did another book. And then Ambrose was the same way. He didn't even want to look at the rushes or anything. They had to coax him to come over to England, and he wouldn't go over when they were shooting Band. And they sent the first run of the film to some people that Stephen knew who knew the way around the camera. They rented a movie theater, and Steve went in there by himself in the movie theater and watched it. He wouldn't go to England. So I got things to do, I got books to write. But I was interested in learning because McCullough was a good friend of mine. I had his son as a student at Lafayette, and we had the same editor at Simon and Schuster as well. And had known David for many years, great Pittsburgh guy. But anyway, he told me, he said, when you get involved in movies, they're going to steal a lot of stuff from you and not give you attribution. I didn't find that, by the way, with this. Orloff, is amazing. He footnotes his scripts, but and you're gonna learn a lot as well. You're gonna learn compression, and compression like you didn't experience in writing a long book. There's still compression, but not the kind of compression. A script is a minimalist object. You look at a script and you say, how are you going to make a movie out of that? Because there isn't much to it. When John would show me Orloff, I looked at all his scripts after he wrote them, and we critiqued them and talked about them endlessly. And, my first feeling was, this is it. But yeah, okay, you got to leave breathing space for the director and the actors. If they're of any prominence, they're going to want to influence, the film, and in a certain kind of way. So I learned a lot, and I came away with a lot of respect, especially for Tom Hanks, because he told us, a bunch of us at the first meeting we had of the writers and some of the creative people, that we were going to do a film that stood up to the facts. We weren't going to create any composite characters. Every character had to have been a real character with his real name. Everything in the film had to have happened. And we want to try to get as close to how it happened as possible. It's never going to be perfect, but the key word is fidelity. The script and the film have to have fidelity, have to be true. There's enough drama, excitement, and interest in the war itself without you having to make it up or to Hollywoodize the film. Tom liked he was visiting us in Easton, staying at our house, and I was so impressed when I picked him up at our local airport. And he had 2 suitcases. I said, well, you're only staying a weekend. And he said, yeah, one's just filled with books. I said, how many? He said, there's about 13 in there. The latest books on German history. I want to get their side of the picture. And he said, I also have about 300 note cards that we're going to go over this weekend. I said, oh my God, I'm going to do something like that. But he becomes a real student of the film and is really, really good at it. Like we just finished. I was just working with Tom 5 days ago. We just finished a documentary on the 100th Bomb Group, which is really a documentary of the 8th Air Force. And we're going to show that on the last night, the 8th night of the presentation of Masters of the Air. And that's pretty good. That's really well done. A guy named Mark Herzog, who did the film that I mentioned before, He Has Seen War. I love working with Mark. He also did a great little biography of David McCullough. So, that's how it kind of happened. And I think our togetherness and the crew, the actors, the technicians, the commitment that the set makers had. I mean, the film takes place at a place called Thorpe Abbotts. That's the name of the airfield for the 100th Bomb Group. What are we going to do to make it Thorpe Abbotts? Well, Spielberg said, well, we'll make it. We'll have it made. And outside of Oxford, where I used to live when I was teaching at Oxford, near this town called Abington, he built an Air Force base with the runways and the hangars. And then he built 3 B-17s from scratch. They didn't fly, but everything else worked, propellers and everything else. So that we could use it in some scenes with cranes, put these gigantic cranes up on the side and attach them to the wings. You can't see them in the film. And the plane and the propellers are spinning and the plane's landing. It really looks like a bomber landing. So you don't have to use CGI and all that other stuff. and they're being hauled all around the base and worked on by the mechanics and things like that. So we were able to do that. And then he built a complete German Stalag. Well, when he said he was doing a Stalag, I thought he was going to do one barracks. I don't know how many barracks there were, but there were a lot of them, over a dozen. And when I first went into the barracks, I thought, oh, it's kind of a minimalist setup, and one room will be like no. And then you go over to the bunks, and the shaving cream and the razors and everything was from the period. Or you go into the officers' club at another site in England where we recreated the experience of the briefings and everything else. All the booze was exactly the booze from the period. And I was watching one screening when they were telling Rosie Rosenthal was speaking to the guys, and he said, okay, today's the day. We're going in on Omaha Beach, and it's the invasion. And there's all kinds of cheering and cameras catching this. And I was off stage, sitting at a little in front of a desk. And on the desk was a firebox. And I thought, the official correspondence, at least the first page would be official correspondence for verisimilitude. Well, I went down to like 5th, 6th, and 50th page there, and they were all Air Force documents, right down to the bottom one. You didn't have to do that. About 100 of these things in that thing that nobody will ever see. No one will ever see. Amazing. He did that with, it is amazing. He did that with John Adams. I forget whose grandson it was. They wanted to get him into film. And it was a trial of the British soldiers, the lobster backs for the Boston Massacre. So they put the kid up. There's a stage in the room, in the courtroom, and there's a curtain that comes down, and they put the kid on the stage, and so he wouldn't be seen completely. He's behind the camera, but his legs stick out. So everyone said, oh, we just have to get him some white stockings like colonials wore and some shoes. And Spielberg said, no. He's got to feel like he's there. Get him a wig, get him a powdered wig, get him a blouse, but get the whole thing. And that's what he did. That's what he did. When he was doing Saving Private Ryan, when the guys land, Hanks's division, lands on D-Day, a lot of the guys lose their legs, and Spielberg didn't think it looked right. It didn't seem like they were crippled in that way. And so he went to hospitals and got guys who had actually lost legs and were willing to show that in a film, and picked it up from there. So he has that feel for making the experience as vivid, really as vivid as possible. So it's fun to be involved in a project where everybody's committed like that. The guys who built the planes were so proud. And one of the planes they built, B-17s, I mentioned to you before that most of the action in the film in the air takes place inside the plane. And there's all kinds of movement. I mean, I can't imagine in my wildest dreams, and I was ready to sign up for the Marine Corps. I kept thinking about this, how you going to hold up in combat. And I can't imagine being inside that packed, stinking fuselage with, shit and piss and vomit and, the cordite, the smells, the gunpowder, and the chaos in there, especially if two guys get hit really bad and there's blood all over the place and they're dying, gaping wounds, sucking wounds. And then they got to tend to their guns. If they tend to their guns, if they tend to their comrades, and you're just getting hammered in the air and the plane shaking. I can't imagine an experience like that. To go through that and then get back in the plane again 2 days later. So to film that sort of stuff, you got to move around a lot as a cameraman. And the cameraman said, we just don't have the room. So Spielberg built the third B-17. And it's wider than a traditional B-17, since you'll never see it from the outside. So the cameraman can go in there and move around a lot. There's space for them to store their cameras and their film and to move around to get the kind of angled shots that they want. So there's a lot of thought into trying to recreate the experience exactly as it happened. Hanks always liked the German film Das Boot. which is
One of the best World War II films ever.
He thought it was, and he said, you know, if we can do something like that when we first started, we will have succeeded. We will have succeeded. Yeah. And he said, somebody said, well, what else? You know, he said, no cliches. I want a cliche-free film. And try to stay away from things that have been done 1,000 times in air war films. So that was a stretch. That was a hard thing to do. A lot of pressure on Orloff to do that, who was an historian as much as a filmmaker, as a screenwriter. I mean, he did a tremendous amount of his own research. We just didn't hand him Masters of the Air and give him a research associate. He worked the archives. I mean, I took him over to Thorpe Abbotts. I introduced him to people, to the archives, etc. And he hired his own research assistant. And by the end of it, he knew more about the 100th than I did, for God's sakes. He was great. Great.
Beth Ruschel, I just want to say hi to Beth. Beth, it was good to see you at our year-end breakfast on Saturday. And I know that you've been looking forward to this Masters of the Air series, and you have a question I think many of us have. Oh, do we have Beth? Maybe Beth is gone. Hold on a second. Beth, I don't know. You must be gone. But I do see Bob and Cadis. Hold on, Bob. I'm going to ask you to unmute. See, you're raising your hand. Oh, there, Beth. I'm sorry. You need to unmute. Okay, Beth. Bob, you're going to have to wait, but you unmute yourself. All right, Beth. Good to see you.
Hi. I've really been looking forward to this. I love your book. I've listened to it on audio, and read it, and I'm praying that they're able to capture all of the, you know, you show so much from the view of the veteran, and I'm just really hoping that sometimes they always, you know, the book is always better than the movie, but I think that who you worked with, I'm praying that they were able to capture a good bit of it. But I have been waiting for this to come out for so long. And I just wondered, I'm one of those people that's been like, you know, Googling for months. When is it coming out? When is it coming out? Was there a reason why it was delayed so long?
Well, there were a dozen reasons. I mean, we ran into COVID, shut us down for the longest period of time, and we had tremendously strict COVID protocols. So every time you bring in somebody new, you know, got to go through the whole thing. And some actors didn't want to be around other actors, and then because we had a massive cast, 1,200 people running around, things like that. Then, one of the big problems was, I'm not allowed to talk about this, but I'll just mention that we were originally going to do it with the producing studio at HBO's, and HBO had done the first 2 volumes, if you will, of the series, you know, Band of Brothers and the Pacific. And we had a gang at HBO that was really good. And but they started to go away from, they told us that they were going away from large scale productions like this. So the concern on the part of Spielberg, and I think I can speak to this, was, are we going to get second fiddle on this one when we're promised that this is going to be their absolute feature, film of the year, you know? And so there was that kind of concern. And then all kinds of things happened, and he wound up moving the product over to Apple and put a bid in for it. And then there was a question of, can the film travel in the business? And there's where I can't get into a lot of stuff, but with Spielberg's influence, it did travel. We were able to get all the things that we wanted from HBO and use them. So those are the kinds of, experiences. And then the actors' strike, that was a killer, It was a full year, And then when the actors strike, and there are various mutations of that, I mean, there's the camera people, and then there's the actors themselves, so there's 2 separate strikes. So You
I
held
was
your
just
breath.
hoping it would come out in time for some of the veterans that were in the Bloody 100th to actually be able to watch it.
Well, that's key. I was talking to the guys in the studio before the show, and that's one thing I'm very glad of, that it is out. But I do know a lot of guys who were eagerly awaiting it and who aren't with us, and it would be heart tearing really to go to these, as I often do, to these bomb group reunions and things, and speak to these guys, and their question was your question: when's this going to happen? And then it started to be, is it going to happen? And then you got the skeptics, And of course, if you go on the web or something like that, you learn a completely different story. This will never happen. It was never meant to happen. It was a phony baloney operation from the beginning. And but yeah, we had discourse, but through it all, we didn't lose anybody, and not a single actor quit. Not a single director quit. Not a single writer quit. Yeah. So
It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I want to say hi to Tom Wiley, who is a B-17 pilot, 100 years old. He's on the program in the Zoom room with us with Joan Dawson. He flew in the 15th Air Force out of Foggia, Italy. And Bob Ankaitis, you are friends with Don Miller. How are you, Bob? You recovered from our Vietnam trip.
I am. I've been doing a lot of sleeping.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, Don.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. I don't have a question for you, Don, but I just wanted to let you know.
Well, you could talk about your experiences all night here.
I just wanted to let you know that Kathy and I are sitting here in our home in Bethlehem and have thoroughly enjoyed your talk tonight, as we have all your talks that we've been privileged to hear over the years. And we both would like to wish you and Rose a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And thanks for being on the Veterans Breakfast Club tonight.
Thanks. Geez, I really miss Kathy. She typed a number of my books. Going back from Kathy to the Kingdom of Coal. That was the first one.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And working with Sharpie. Oh, geez.
Well,
questions, Todd, or?
Yeah,
one I'd like to get in before the end.
Oh, why don't you get in your question?
Well, Don, and maybe this is more of a question for Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, but we've done the Army, we've done the Marines, now the Air Force. When are we going to get to the Navy?
This began.
Not even possible.
Well, Spielberg's father was in the Navy. Hanks' dad was in the Navy.
Wow.
When this was first proposed, and I had nothing to do with this, they came to me and said, we're thinking about, before they offered, the contract, we're thinking about a film that does the tin can soldiers and sailors in the Pacific, the destroyers at Leyte Gulf, that does Leyte Gulf and the 8th Air Force. And they decided, I wasn't privy to any of these conversations, they decided that was too much of a burden to take on in the film, and the close connections weren't there. It was a stretch to get a good, fast-moving narrative where everything connects. And so, lucky for me, they decided that they were just going to do Masters. Yeah. But I don't know. Tom loves the Navy, and has done an amazing film recently on the convoy system.
Yeah, Greyhound.
That's a great film.
It is,
and I think that represents the kind of fidelity, honoring the truth, and also it represents something else that Tom's very big on, that the veterans talk about all the time. It's all about just doing your job. And if everybody keeps busy, it lowers the tension level in the plane, and we'll get the thing done. But we have to have concentration on individual responsibilities, and then we will be acting together as a team, because the plane is designed so that if everybody does their job, it'll get to the target and maybe be able to release its bombs if it's not interfered with. But that's, you don't try to over dramatize it and have guys talking all the time about fighting for democracy and things like that. I mean, they're fighting to come home, and they enlisted for good reasons, and they enlisted to save their country, and that was gravely threatened. But those were not the things that were on their minds when they were in combat, and so we try to capture that too. So there's not a lot. There's not what I think the film lacks, and this is to its credit, is preachiness, and you see that, with the guys, just everybody bearing down on what they have to do, and the importance of knowing what you're doing.
We have a Renee Johnson, who was a Red Cross donut dolly in Vietnam, and she heard you mention, Don, Red Cross women on bases in England. And Renee, you have a question.
Yes, I was wondering if you had, actually interviewed any of them. If so, who and when? Because these women are my heroes. I grew up military, but what these women did was exceptional, in my opinion, far above what we did in Vietnam. And if you have any stories about them.
Yeah, I got some funny ones too.
I love funny stories.
The 100th Bomb Group had only 3 Red Cross girls. That was it, and with 2,000 men, 3 women, the pressure was on. And they, of course, met the flyers after the missions, and they handed out donuts and coffee and things like that. And also, a lot of the guys who didn't drink, the guys that drank usually went to the officers' clubs or just stayed in their barracks. A lot of the guys that didn't drink went up to the Red Cross Club, and which was non-alcohol, and they had quates and checkers and dances and all sorts of things. And there were a lot of Red Cross outfits all over London, so you would go into London on leave and easily get a cheap room at a clean, well-lit Red Cross club. And there was a place called Rainbow Corner, and it's still on Piccadilly Square, the actual building itself. It's not called Rainbow Corner any longer. And that was a crazy place. That was, you could get a hamburger for 15 cents, a real, hamburger with onions and a bun, a milkshake. They had a bowling alley. They had dancing. They had poker games in the back room. They had tours of London, regular dances. Fred Astaire's sister, was a host there, and a lot of entertainers would show up there as well. So that was a chance also to meet Red Cross girls and things like that. But my funny story is there are 2, I'm not going to do any names here. I was really interested in their experience. So I was interested in collecting diaries, if there were any diaries. And I do these trips for the 8th Air Force, I should say for the museum in New Orleans, the World War II Museum. We call them Masters of the Air Tours, where we take about 30, 35 people to all the bases. And a lot of them have been turned over into museums now. The control tower is the museum, and then Nissan huts are there, and sometimes the airstrips and things like that. These are really great. They put you close to the war and things. And one day I was talking about, the donut girls and things. And this one woman who I knew very well, and said, well, my mother was one during the war, and she kept a diary. And I said, well, do you have access to that diary? She said, well, I have it here in my purse. So throughout the bus trip, she read excerpts from the diaries. And then I took them to Hanks, and we were able to use them for atmospheric effect in the film, and it was great. But the funny story is, and I hope she's not watching. She married an Air Force pilot, and there were these two bases that were really close together, and one of them was 100th. I won't mention the other one, but she was stationed at the 100th, and she would meet her future husband, she thought, at an inn, a small country inn, right in between the two bases. Okay, and reserve a room for the night there as well. So that was a trysting place, as it were. So when we were on the bus tour, I said, "Do you want to go to that bar and see if anybody's alive who might have known your mother?" Well, sure as heck. We got there, and I talked to the proprietor, and she said, "Well, my mom was alive during the war. She's upstairs. She used to tend bar here as a young girl, help out, just clean glasses and stuff." And I said, "Can we talk to her?" So my friend, the daughter of the Red Cross girl, they met, they talked, and she showed a picture of her mother, and to this woman. She said, "That's her. That's her." And she said, "Well, I have a picture of the guy too." So she pulled out this picture of the airman. She said, "That's not him." Are you sure? That's not him. But anyway, yeah.
What a wonderful way to end this program. Thank you so much, Don, for giving us 90 minutes of your time here, especially as
I really appreciate the questions and the interest. Yeah.
So, and there are more questions I know that we're leaving on the table, but man, are we glad that you were able to come on our program, especially so close to the airing of the series. You're a busy person.
And
good.
We're going to be doing quite a bit of programming around Masters of the Air, and look forward to having a lot of our other authors and a few veterans that we've had over the years back on. And Don, if we're able to get you back on, maybe towards the end of the programming, you certainly have an open invite anytime you'd like to.
I'd be happy to. In fact, we could do a podcast comparison. We're now in the process of doing. We came up with this idea a couple of weeks ago, and we're ready down the line. We're going to do a podcast after every show, and it'll be an hour long. And Kurt Sadusky, the guy you saw me interviewed with at the museum, he's a producer of the show, Masters of the Air. He and I are co-hosts. So we're going to do 8 of these podcasts. We've already filmed down in New Orleans at the museum. We filmed 4 or 5 of them. And we'll finish them up in early January out in Hollywood. So that'll be fun. So we'll have our own little podcast experience too. And we'll have actors on, and set designers and things like that, and veterans, whatever.
Oh, that's so cool. We'll have to share the information on that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's right after the show. Yeah, every night that it airs. Yeah.
Oh, right after the episode.
Right after the show. Yeah.
Next. Okay.
There's a podcast. Yeah, usually about 45 minutes. Yeah.
Excellent. Well,
that's key to that episode.
Yeah. All right, we'll be watching it all.
We will be, and also, as Glenn mentioned, we will be doing our own series here on the VBC in January through March. So every week when an episode is aired, Glenn will be hosting a program. We're going to get veterans and people who are involved in the production on. So we'll be releasing that schedule pretty soon. Thank you again so much, Dr. Miller. Thank you, Mr. Flickinger. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, guys.
I wish you all a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2024.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Don. All the best.